This battlefield and all the dynamics of it, of which the chairman and I are responsible for ensuring the president understands every branch and sequel of what could happen, and we did.
So
the fact that those contingencies all were part of the possibility, and we understood that, is all the more reason why President Trump deserves the kind of praise he should get for undertaking this effort, having the courage to ensure that crazy Islamists can't have a nuclear weapon.
As the Iran war entered another critical phase, Senator Jack Reed confronted Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth with a question that went far beyond the battlefield. If the Pentagon had planned for every scenario, why were global oil markets disrupted, American troops still under attack, and the Strait of Hormuz effectively threatened? The exchange quickly became one of the hearing's sharpest clashes over the administration's war strategy.
Secretary Hegseth, on February 28th, when you initiated this war without authorization from Congress, the Strait of Hormuz was open and providing vital fuel supplies for the whole world. Now they're closed effectively, impacting globally the price of oil and the economies of the whole world. But the Department of Defense has been planning for potential operations against Iran for many, many years, and one of their obvious assumptions was that the Strait of Hormuz could be closed. Were you unaware of that?
Senator, you are correct. Nobody plans more and looks at more contingencies than our department, and so, of course, undertaking a historic effort like this, of this scope and scale, of course, the Strait of Hormuz was front and center in every single aspect of that. Hence why one of our key objectives to begin with was to sink the entirety of Iran's Navy, which its conventional Navy was sunk. Now, you can't get rid of every single fast boat and every single machine gun and a fast boat or every single coastal cruise missile. So we acknowledge that if the state decided to become a terror state shooting at commercial shipping, that would be an ongoing and contested part of the battle, to include their willingness to mine international waters. So one side weaponized the strait, and we've been fighting back the entire time.
Completely aware that the Strait of Hormuz could be closed, and obviously sinking their ships has not affected their ability to effectively close the straits.
We had U.S. boats that surrendered to Iranian ships under the Biden administration. So their Navy was effective in expeditionary ways in the past.
We're talking about a war you started, not a situation in which oil was flowing freely. There was no conflict. We weren't losing personnel as a result of Iranian actions. So your fallback to the Biden administration is just a very, very obvious excuse for what I think is probably, as you described so often, gross negligence. You did not fully inform the president that you would be in a situation where the Strait of Hormuz could be effectively closed, oil prices could surge, and effectively the Iranians could maintain their ability to strike back as they are right now. They just killed some of our servicemen last weekend.
This battlefield and all the dynamics of it, of which the chairman and I are responsible for ensuring the president understands every branch and sequel of what could happen, and we did. So the fact that those contingencies all were part of the possibility, and we understood that, is all the more reason why President Trump deserves the kind of praise he should get for undertaking this effort, having the courage to ensure that crazy Islamists can't have a nuclear weapon to hold us at issue. And he's been willing to stay committed to that regardless of the challenges.
So he should be praised. He should be praised for starting a war without authority, creating a situation in which the world economy is suffering tremendously. We have to have extra money for our farmers. And we have no outcome, at least no realistic outcome in sight yet. Let me switch to General Kane. General Kane, these airstrikes have not yet deterred and defeated the Iranians. Do you think airstrikes alone will do that?
So I think academically, as you look across the totality of history, air power's got limits, and we always have to be mindful of those. I think where America's area of exclusivity is when we bring the totality of the diplomatic, informational, economic, and pair that with the military, and there's a lot of that work going on.
Well, the military, the next step would be escalation by ground combat. Do you anticipate that escalation?
Sir, I think it'd be unhelpful for me to opine on hypotheticals. What I can tell you is we always develop an unbelievable amount of options and the associated risks, and then my main job is to always ensure that leaders understand those options and the risks.
Now, if you employ ground troops, to seize objectives, which I would assume would be the first stage. Are you prepared for an extended guerrilla war, which would likely happen in that area?
Sir, with all due respect, I think it'd be unhelpful for me to opine on hypothetical situations on whatever decisions the president may or may not take in the future.
Have you advised the president that a ground combat would be very expensive in the lives of our soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and also could probably lead to an extended unconventional war in that area? I don't see the Iranians sort of throwing their hands up saying, welcome to Iran.
Senator, I always advise the president on a range of military options and all of the risks that are contained within that, but I have to keep my military advice to the president private, sir.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
By the time this hearing took place on July 22, 2026, the debate in Washington had expanded well beyond whether military strikes against Iran were successful. Lawmakers were increasingly examining what happened after the opening phase of the conflict, how much the war was costing, whether U.S. objectives had changed, and what risks remained for American forces across the Middle East. In the days surrounding this hearing, Congress continued reviewing the administration's emergency defense funding request for the Iran conflict. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told lawmakers that military operations had already cost roughly $37.5 billion, while the Pentagon sought additional funding to replenish precision-guided munitions, strengthen regional force protection, and maintain military readiness. At the same time, members of Congress from both parties continued demanding detailed briefings on the administration's long-term strategy, the legal basis for continued military operations, and the risks of a prolonged conflict. Those developments explain why Senator Jack Reed approached the hearing differently from many of his colleagues. Rather than focusing on the initial air campaign, Reed concentrated on what happened after the strikes. He argued that one of the most predictable consequences of attacking Iran was the possibility that Tehran could threaten or disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategically important maritime choke points. Reed questioned whether the administration had fully prepared for the economic consequences if commercial shipping came under pressure and global energy markets reacted. Secretary Hegseth responded that the Pentagon had considered those risks from the beginning. He said military planners had anticipated Iranian attempts to threaten shipping and explained that one of the operation's primary objectives had been to destroy Iran's conventional naval capability. According to Hegseth, the campaign severely damaged Iran's navy and defense infrastructure, but he acknowledged that smaller attack boats, coastal missile systems, sea mines, and other asymmetric capabilities could still pose a continuing threat to commercial shipping. That distinction became the center of the disagreement. Reed argued that regardless of how much damage had been inflicted on Iran's conventional forces, the practical result remained the same if shipping continued to face disruption and oil markets remained unstable. He also questioned whether the administration had fully informed President Trump about the economic and military risks before launching the operation, suggesting that the conflict had created uncertainty without producing a clear long-term resolution. Hegseth rejected that criticism and defended both the planning process and the president's decision. He argued that every major contingency had been evaluated before military action began and maintained that preventing Iran from advancing toward a nuclear weapon justified accepting difficult strategic risks. From his perspective, the continuing challenges in the region did not mean the campaign had failed. They reflected the reality of confronting a state capable of using asymmetric tactics even after suffering major conventional military losses. The hearing then shifted to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane, with Reed asking whether airstrikes alone could achieve the administration's objectives or whether future escalation, including the possibility of ground combat, might eventually become necessary. General Kane declined to speculate about future presidential decisions, but emphasized that military planners continuously develop multiple operational options while carefully assessing the risks associated with each. He also reiterated that his advice to the president remains confidential. One issue remained largely unanswered throughout the exchange: what would define success from this point forward? Reed repeatedly pressed witnesses about long-term strategy, the possibility of escalation, and whether the United States could become drawn into a broader regional conflict. Administration officials instead emphasized military preparedness, strategic flexibility, and the need to maintain pressure on Iran while avoiding discussion of hypothetical future operations. Unlike earlier hearings that focused on the initial strikes against Iran, this exchange reflected a new phase of congressional oversight. The questions were no longer limited to whether the military operation succeeded tactically. Senators were examining its economic consequences, the protection of U.S. forces, the risks to global energy supplies, and whether the administration had a clearly defined strategy if the conflict continued. Those issues remained central to Congress's oversight of the war long after the first missiles were launched, making this hearing part of a broader debate over military strategy, executive decision-making, and America's long-term role in the Middle East.